Imagine waking up in your quiet, typical suburban neighborhood to the smell of a massive gas leak.
Oh, yeah. Pure panic.
Right. You rush outside, totally panicking, only to discover it's not a broken pipe at all. It's the exhaust from 35 industrial methane turbines.
Which is just wild.
It is. Turbines that a tech billionaire just quietly installed next door to power a supercomputer. So welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah, we have a lot to cover today.
We really do. Today, we are tearing down that sterile, pristine myth of the artificial intelligence industry. We're taking you into the incredible investigative reporting of tech journalist Karen Howe, specifically her work in Empire of AI.
Right, and her work is, well, it's just so thorough. I mean, she spent 8 years digging into the tech sector.
8 years?
Yeah, conducting over 300 interviews, and 90 of those were with current and former OpenAI employees alone.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what her reporting does is crucial. It forces us to stop looking at AI as some, ethereal magic trick happening in a weightless cloud.
Exactly. It grounds it.
Right, it makes us analyze it as a massive, heavy, physical, industrial reality.
And I want to be clear right up front. The goal today isn't to be blindly pro-technology, or inherently anti-technology for that matter.
No, not at all.
We are just looking impartially at the structures of power that are forming around this industry. The sources argue, and quite convincingly, I think, that to understand what is happening to your labor, your copyright, and your local power grid, you can't look at these companies as scrappy Silicon Valley startups anymore.
You really can't.
You have to analyze them as modern empires.
Which completely shifts how you view the daily headlines, because when you peel back the apocalyptic marketing campaign...
Well, the marketing is everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And the glossy product launches. The contrast between what AI executives claim in public and what is actually happening in their server farms and in the living rooms of their workforce is just staggering.
It really is a completely different reality on the ground.
Exactly. So for you listening, if you use electricity, if you hold a white-collar job, or if you simply consume media, the decisions being made right now by a very small, very insulated group of people are actively redesigning your physical and economic reality.
They absolutely are.
So let's start at the absolute bedrock. Before we get into the labor exploitation or the methane turbines, we have to talk about the core premise of what they are actually selling.
The foundational myth.
Right. We have to talk about the word intelligence.
It is arguably the most successful marketing term of the 20th century.
Seriously.
And to understand why, the reporting takes us back to a very specific gathering. This was in 1956 at Dartmouth University.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So a group of scientists met to formally establish a new academic discipline, right?
Yeah.
The goal was aimed at getting machines to simulate human thought.
Ambitious for the 50s.
Very. And an assistant professor named John McCarthy was tasked with naming this new field. Now, a year prior, he had pitched the term automata studies.
See, automata studies sounds like you're building clockwork mechanisms.
Exactly.
Or like assembly line robots. It sounds very mechanical and, well, limited.
And that is precisely why some of his colleagues actually preferred it. They liked the limitation.
Right. It was accurate.
But when McCarthy pivoted and officially chose the term artificial intelligence, several scientists pushed back hard.
I bet.
Yeah, they argued that by anchoring the software to the word intelligence, you are permanently pegging the ambition of the technology to the recreation of human cognition.
Which sets this impossibly loaded expectation right out of the gate.
Exactly.
And the massive red flag here, which the sources point out immediately, is that there is no scientific consensus on what human intelligence actually is.
None. Across biology, neurology, psychology, no one can universally agree on a rigorous, measurable definition of human intelligence.
And historically, whenever we have tried to rigidly define or measure intelligence, it has almost always been driven by incredibly nefarious motives.
Oh, absolutely.
It's usually a pseudoscientific tool to rank populations, to try and prove certain groups are inferior. It gets dark fast. So we're essentially chasing a goalpost that doesn't scientifically exist.
And because artificial general intelligence, or AGI, has no fixed scientific definition, it becomes a completely malleable concept.
A blank canvas.
Right. The executives at the top of these empires are free to redefine AGI, depending entirely on who is sitting across the table from them.
The reporting maps this out so brilliantly with OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
So when Altman is sitting in front of the United States Congress facing lawmakers who actually have the power to regulate him, AGI is described as this benevolent, magical system that will cure cancer and solve climate change.
So it's a total savior technology.
Exactly. But then, when he is negotiating a multi-billion-dollar investment deal with Microsoft, AGI is suddenly defined as a system capable of generating $100 billion in revenue.
It's a shapeshifter. And then you look at OpenAI's own website. The definition shifts again to highly autonomous systems that outperform humans in most economically valuable work.
Right. Curing cancer is not the same thing as a massive revenue generator, which is not the same thing as a chatbot that can write code faster than a junior developer.
No, those are three entirely different goals.
They are changing the definition based on the audience they need to mobilize. Which begs the question, if the definition is this fluid, what do the engineers actually believe they are building?
Well, the interviews highlight the philosophy of Ilya Sutskever. He was a co-founder and former chief scientist at OpenAI, and his mentor, Geoffrey Hinton.
Right, big names in the field.
Huge. And they operate on a fiercely debated hypothesis called the statistical engine theory.
Okay, explain that one.
So their foundational belief is that the human brain is, at its core, just a giant probability calculator. They hypothesize that human cognition is essentially statistical pattern matching.
Just guessing what comes next.
Basically, yeah. So following that logic, if you build a digital neural network and feed it enough data and simply make it bigger, it will scale linearly into a digital brain.
Wait, I have to challenge that premise.
Fine.
I understand the statistical engine concept, right? Like, large language models predict the next most likely word in a sequence based on massive training data.
Right, autocomplete on steroids.
Exactly. But are we just confusing sheer processing speed with actual holistic understanding?
Many people would argue yes.
Because think about it, a pocket calculator can multiply two 10-digit numbers 1,000,000 times faster than I can.
Oh, easily.
But I don't look at a Casio calculator and call it wise.
No, you don't.
It excels at a narrow mathematical task. Aren't these models just highly sophisticated language calculators being branded as digital gods?
Well, many neuroscientists and psychologists completely agree with your skepticism there. They argue it is incredibly reductive to view human consciousness, emotion, and reasoning as mere probability calculations.
It feels very flattening.
It is. However, whether the science is reductive or not almost doesn't matter, because the belief in that linear scaling is driving billions of dollars in infrastructure.
The belief justifies the empire.
Exactly.
And this is where the semantic trick directly impacts the public. When a company successfully convinces society and themselves, honestly, that they are on the verge of birthing a new species of intelligence, they automatically grant themselves a moral blank check.
All 100%.
Because if your machine is going to, cure all human disease, then suddenly breaking copyright laws, scraping the internet, or displacing millions of workers, it just seems like a necessary or almost noble sacrifice.
The belief in their own exceptionalism completely isolates them from normal regulatory friction.
They write their own rules.
Right. But securing the capital to actually build that infrastructure requires more than just a debated scientific hypothesis.
You need money, a lot of it.
You need a master storyteller. You need someone who can craft an irresistible myth to align massive amounts of power and money. And the reporting points directly to Sam Altman's ability to navigate and manipulate the psychology of Silicon Valley.
Specifically looking at his 2015 relationship with Elon Musk, right?
Yes.
Let's set the stage for 2015. So Elon Musk is arguably the most influential tech billionaire on the planet, and he is publicly terrified of AI.
Terrified. He's going on podcasts, doing interviews at MIT, comparing AI development to summoning the demon.
Summoning the demon.
Yeah, he genuinely views it as a civilization-ending threat.
Right. And at the exact same time, Sam Altman wants Musk to help fund and co-found OpenAI.
A bit of a mismatch there.
Exactly, because before this moment, Altman had publicly stated that engineered viruses were the most likely existential threat to humanity.
Right, not AI.
But suddenly, when he needs Musk's buy-in, Altman's rhetoric undergoes this miraculous transformation.
What's fascinating here is how the sources show Altman explicitly mirroring Musk's language.
It's so calculated.
In a 2015 blog post, Altman wrote that superhuman machine intelligence was probably the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity.
Wow.
He deliberately pivoted away from his previous stance on engineered viruses to align perfectly with Musk's apocalyptic fears.
The reporting heavily suggests this was a calculated tactic to win trust. Altman positioned himself as the only other person in the room who truly grasped the gravity of the demon.
And it worked. Musk felt he had found a kindred spirit, brought his massive funding, and OpenAI was born as a nonprofit.
But a nonprofit can't raise the billions needed to buy the computer chips for the statistical scaling hypothesis we talked about earlier.
You know, chips are expensive.
Right. So they decide to create a capped for-profit entity underneath the nonprofit board, and that structural shift triggers an incredible internal power struggle.
The critical decision was who would be the CEO of this newly formed for-profit engine. Initially, key technical leaders like Ilya Sutskever and Greg Brockman selected Elon Musk.
Which makes sense. They trusted his operational track record with SpaceX and Tesla.
Sure, but the sources detail how Altman maneuvered behind the scenes. He personally appealed to Brockman, arguing that putting the keys to AGI into the hands of someone as erratic and unpredictable as Elon Musk was profoundly dangerous.
He weaponized the very apocalyptic stakes they all believed in.
Exactly.
He essentially argued, if this technology is going to rule the world, do you really want a guy known for erratic Twitter behavior holding the launch codes?
And it was a persuasive argument. Brockman flipped, Sutskever followed, and they ousted Musk from the CEO path.
Musk basically gave an ultimatum, right? Like, make me CEO or I walk with my funding.
Yeah, and they let him walk.
They called his bluff. But this internal paranoia about instability didn't end with Musk. It came back to bite Altman himself during the chaotic rollout of ChatGPT.
Right. The firing of Sam Altman by OpenAI's independent board members is often portrayed in the media as this high-minded philosophical dispute about AI safety.
Like it was some sci-fi debate.
Yeah, but the reporting gets into the gritty, operational reality. Sutskever and Chief Technology Officer Mira Murati approached independent board members, like Helen Toner, with serious allegations of Altman creating severe instability.
But what does instability actually mean in this context? Because from the outside, ChatGPT was the fastest growing consumer product in human history.
It looked like total dominance.
Right, it was flawless.
Internally, though, the infrastructure was buckling. Because they were scaling so aggressively, servers were constantly crashing. They were panic hiring and then abruptly firing people.
It's total whiplash.
And employees were mysteriously disappearing from internal communication channels without any explanation.
That's incredibly toxic.
Furthermore, the executives alleged Altman was actively sowing division. He was pitting teams against each other to maintain control and creating a deeply toxic environment devoid of trust.
Add to that the discovery of the OpenAI startup fund, which the board allegedly found out was legally owned by Altman personally, not the company.
A massive red flag.
Right. So in the minds of the board, who genuinely believed they were stewarding a technology that could destroy humanity, you cannot have a Machiavellian pressure cooker as your operational environment.
No, you need stability.
So they fired him. But the empire immediately struck back. Microsoft, the investors, and the employees revolted, and Altman was reinstated in days.
Which eventually led to Sutskever leaving the company entirely.
Which is just a crazy turnover for the people supposedly building a digital god.
This history of relentless maneuvering really brings into focus the core psychological tactic utilized by these executives. It's cognitive dissonance as a mechanism for control.
You hear these executives speak, and the duality is jarring.
It gives you whiplash.
They stand on stage and promise utopia, mass human flourishing, the end of poverty, everything. But in the exact same breath, they calmly state their product might end human civilization.
Right. The source material quotes Dario Amodei, a former OpenAI executive who left to found Anthropic. He publicly estimates a 10% to 25% chance of catastrophic failure on the scale of human civilization.
A 1 in 4 chance. Consider the implications of that probability. If someone handed you an airplane ticket and said, hey, there's a 1 in 4 chance this plane will crash and destroy the planet, no rational human being would board that flight.
Not a chance.
Yet these executives are building the plane and demanding society thank them for it.
And fund it.
Right. I struggle to understand why they would broadcast this fear, though. If you are trying to avoid government regulation, wouldn't you want to downplay the risks? Why constantly talk about summoning the demon?
What's fascinating here is that the apocalyptic rhetoric is not a warning. It's a highly effective tool for centralizing power.
Okay, how so?
By claiming the stakes are literal Armageddon, they argue that the technology is far too complex and far too dangerous for the general public or even standard government regulators to understand.
Oh, it's the ultimate
Keep
gatekeeping.
going.
The demon is so terrifying that only we, the benevolent architects with the unique intellect and moral fortitude, can safely contain it.
It justifies a completely anti-democratic approach to deploying infrastructure that impacts billions of people.
It's so arrogant. Karen Howe actually compares this to Frank Herbert's science fiction epic, Dune.
I love this analogy.
It's so good. In the novel, Paul Atreides arrives on a desert planet where a religious myth about a coming messiah has been intentionally planted centuries earlier to control the population.
Right. Paul knows the myth is completely fabricated. But to survive and gain power, he steps into the role of the Messiah anyway.
And the tragedy is that by living the myth every single day, surrounded by followers, he eventually loses himself in the role. He can no longer distinguish his own reality from the manipulation.
And the executives are doing the exact same thing.
They really are. They seeded the Messiah myth of AGI to secure billions in funding and freeze out regulators. But when you spend a decade surrounded by venture capitalists telling you you're a genius,
In media outlets calling you the savior of humanity.
right, you start to genuinely believe your own marketing. And once that messianic cover is established, it provides the perfect smokescreen to build the 3 operational pillars of a modern empire.
So let's look at the mechanics of how this empire actually expands, starting with the first pillar, resource and land grabbing.
Historically, an empire expands by moving into a new physical territory and extracting the raw materials. Timber, gold, oil, all without compensating the local inhabitants.
In the AI era, the new territory is the internet, and the raw material is human expression.
Exactly. Large language models don't just organically learn to write out of thin air. They require immense volumes of data to form those accurate probability distributions we talked about.
Vast amounts of data.
And to get that volume, these companies scrape the intellectual property of millions of artists, authors, journalists, and just everyday internet users.
They absorb decades of copyrighted text, images, and code, entirely without permission and entirely without compensation.
They treated the collective digital output of humanity as an unowned natural resource ripe for unilateral extraction, just there for the taking.
And once the resources are extracted, an empire must ensure that no one questions its authority. Which leads us to the second pillar, monopolizing knowledge production.
This is critical.
If you want to maintain power, you have to be the sole authority on what is true and what is false about your domain. The AI monopolies achieve this by effectively bankrolling the majority of AI safety and ethics research globally.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we need to contextualize how dangerous that is.
Please do.
If the fossil fuel industry bankrolled 90% of the world's climate scientists, society would immediately recognize the massive conflict of interest.
Oh, immediately. We would never accept that.
We would not trust their reports on global warming. Yet, because these AI companies have such immense capital, they fund the academic programs, they sponsor the conferences, and they hire all the top PhDs.
It's a closed loop.
Society largely relies on the empire to fund and police the research regarding the empire's own safety. It's absurd.
And Howe's reporting provides a stark example of what happens when that monopoly on knowledge is challenged from within. Look at the case of Dr. Timnit Gebru at Google.
Right, this is a massive story.
She was the co-lead of the ethical AI team, explicitly hired to critically examine the systems Google was building. But she co-authored a peer-reviewed research paper highlighting the specific real-world harms and biases of large language models.
Which was the exact technology Google was racing to commercialize.
Precisely. And when her research contradicted the Imperial narrative of progress and safety, Google tried to suppress the paper.
And when she pushed back,
They fired her, and soon after, they fired her co-lead as well.
it demonstrates that internal ethics teams often just serve as public relations shields. The moment they produce inconvenient truths, the empire just removes them.
And the suppression extends far beyond internal employees. The sources document OpenAI using aggressive legal intimidation tactics against external civil society watchdogs.
Like the Midas Group.
Right. There is this nonprofit group called Midas, and they were simply scrutinizing OpenAI's unprecedented transition from a nonprofit to a capped for-profit entity.
Just asking standard transparency questions, doing their job as a watchdog.
Exactly. And OpenAI's response was to subpoena them.
It's unbelievable.
The head of this small nonprofit gets a knock on his door and is served legal papers demanding he hand over every piece of communication he ever had involving Elon Musk.
Wait, why Musk?
OpenAI had developed this baseless paranoia that Musk was secretly funding these watchdog groups to sabotage their corporate restructuring.
That's deeply paranoid.
It is. But the purpose wasn't to uncover a conspiracy. The purpose of the subpoena was the chilling effect. You use your massive legal war chest to make critics financially terrified to ask questions.
They bully you into silence. And they also actively manipulate the media narrative through access journalism.
Oh, this is a huge part of the playbook. Tech journalism relies heavily on exclusives, getting the first interview with the CEO or early access to a new model.
And the companies use that access as a weapon. If a journalist writes critically, the access is revoked.
Cut off entirely.
Karen Howe herself experienced this. After writing a profile that the leadership at OpenAI simply didn't like, they completely shut her out for 3 years.
3 years.
They tried to freeze her out of the beat entirely. They only briefly reopened communications when she moved to the Wall Street Journal, which is, a publication too large to ignore.
Right, they couldn't freeze out the journal.
But then they abruptly canceled a planned series of extensive interviews for her book right around the time Sam Altman was fired. They massaged the public image by ensuring only compliant narratives reached the public.
So they control the raw data through scraping, and they control the narrative through intimidation and access. But an empire cannot function without physical maintenance.
This brings us to the third pillar, and honestly, perhaps the most devastating: the extraction of human labor.
The public narrative, the one sold in the pristine product launches, is that AI automates the drudgery. It handles the boring tasks, freeing humanity up to do highly paid creative work.
We've all heard that pitch.
Right. But when you look at the internal corporate reality, the hollowing out of the white-collar economy is moving at a terrifying speed. Hale points to an internal memo from the CEO of Klarna, the massive fintech company.
Okay, what did the memo say?
The CEO proudly announced that Klarna had shrunk its workforce from 7,400 employees down to roughly 3,000.
More than half the company.
Largely through attrition without rehiring. And the justification: AI was now handling 70% of their customer service interactions. And for their software engineers, the fundamental act of coding had been largely resolved by AI.
Resolved.
Wow.
I mean, from the C-suite, this is a massive victory. Production costs plummet, margins explode, and executives are freed up to focus on high-level strategy.
But what happens to the 4,000 people who used to hold those mid-tier jobs?
Right. The narrative claims they transitioned to better roles, but the reporting reveals a grim reality. Many of these displaced workers are being forced into a rapidly expanding, highly precarious field called data annotation.
Data annotation is essentially the invisible factory floor of the digital age. We had to unpack the mechanics of this because it destroys the illusion that AI is organically intelligent.
Because a raw large language model is just a feral probability engine, right?
Exactly. Left to its own devices, it will spit out toxic nonsense, biases, and just endless rambling. To make it sound like a polite, structured assistant, it requires a process called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF.
Meaning tens of thousands of actual human beings are sitting at keyboards, typing out mock conversations, reading the AI's varied responses, and manually grading them.
Yes.
They are literally teaching the machine how to mimic human empathy and logic line by line.
And the reporting from New York Magazine highlighted in the sources profiles the people doing this work. These are not just unskilled laborers.
Who are?
The workforce includes highly educated professionals. We're talking lawyers with advanced degrees, medical doctors, and even award-winning directors who have been laid off or frozen out of their respective industries.
That was wild.
Out of sheer economic desperation, they turn to data annotation gig work just to pay rent.
And the psychological toll of this labor is devastating. These workers operate through third-party platforms that function like digital sweatshops. The story of one mother in the reporting is particularly haunting.
Yeah, that part was tough to read.
She describes being permanently tethered to her laptop, staring at a Slack channel, just waiting for a batch of micro-tasks to drop. The work is unpredictable, so when a project appears, she has to physically fight other gig workers to claim it.
The anxiety of that alone is huge.
And she recounted a moment when a task dropped right as her child came home from school. Desperate for the few dollars the task paid, she screamed at her child for distracting her.
Well,
She told the reporter she felt like a monster. Her deep professional expertise is entirely devalued. Her day is atomized into frantic microtasks, and the structure of the work actively prevents her from being a present parent.
it's tragic. And it illustrates a profound structural economic shift, the breaking of the career ladder.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in almost any traditional professions, finance, media, coding, you enter at the bottom. You do the mundane tasks, you learn the intuition of the business, and you gradually climb to mid-tier and senior roles. AI is actively vaporizing those bottom rungs.
It creates a completely bifurcated economy. You have this massive, desperate pool of precarious data annotators at the bottom and a small, elite group of executives and AI orchestrators at the top.
And the pathway between the two is just gone.
And the darkest irony is that a laid-off copywriter taking a data annotation job is literally spending their day teaching the model how to do the copywriting job they just lost.
They are digging their own economic grave just to survive the week.
Now, a common counterargument to this economic anxiety is the historical comparison to the Industrial Revolution. Critics will say, look, when the tractor was invented, the people pulling the plows lost their jobs. But society adapted. We created new industries. Isn't this just the standard friction of technological progress?
I hear that argument all the time.
How is this fundamentally different from the loom or the assembly line?
The critical difference, which the sources strongly emphasize, is speed and distribution. During the Industrial Revolution, transitioning a society took time. Building a physical factory takes years. Manufacturing and distributing thousands of tractors across a country takes a decade.
Right.
That inherent physical friction gave the labor force, the education system, and governments a generational window to adapt. Workers actually had time to retrain.
But the distribution layer for AI is the open internet. The infrastructure is already in everyone's pocket. ChatGPT reached 100 million users in weeks.
Exactly. The disruption doesn't roll out over a decade. An API update can render an entire sector of junior coders obsolete overnight.
The human workforce simply does not have the biological or economic time required to transition before their livelihoods just evaporate.
And while the distribution of AI is instantaneous and digital, the creation of AI is overwhelmingly physical, which leads us to the most hidden aspect of the empire.
The data centers.
Yes, we tend to focus on the software, but we must ground this ethereal cloud technology in its massive, highly localized physical footprint. The cloud is a deafening, incredibly hot, massively polluting factory sitting in somebody's backyard.
Every time a company decides to scale up its model, adding a trillion more parameters in pursuit of this hypothesized digital brain, it requires building unprecedented physical data centers.
Atlas reporting gives us jaw-dropping examples of this scale.
Let's look at the Stargate project. This is planned by OpenAI and Microsoft in Abilene, Texas. This single data center is projected to be the physical size of Central Park in New York City.
It's hard to even picture that.
To run its massive clusters of computer chips, it will consume more than a gigawatt of power.
A gigawatt.
That is equivalent to over 20% of the power demand of the entire city of New York, just for one facility.
It's staggering. And Meta is planning a supercomputing facility in Louisiana that would be roughly 1/5 the size of the island of Manhattan. We're talking about industrial terraforming.
And looking at the engineering constraints detailed in the reporting, the physical math simply does not align with the clean, green, utopian marketing these companies are pushing.
No, not at all.
The consequences of this physical footprint are immediate, and the reporting reveals a deeply troubling pattern. These massive facilities are frequently placed in vulnerable, historically marginalized working-class communities.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, consider the specific example of Memphis, Tennessee. Elon Musk's company, xAI, built a massive supercomputer there called Colossus. It houses 100,000 GPUs to train their AI model, Grok.
Right. And a local power grid built to support homes and light industry cannot possibly handle the sudden, continuous 100-megawatt draw required by 100,000 chips running at maximum utilization.
It would black out the city. So they didn't just plug into the wall. They essentially brought their own power plant. They deployed 35 methane gas turbines right next to the facility.
35 turbines. And the local community, a predominantly black and brown working-class neighborhood, was not informed.
No warning at all.
They woke up, smelled what they thought was a deadly gas leak, and discovered it was the exhaust from the methane turbines.
This is a community already burdened by historical environmental racism and high rates of industrial pollution. And now, an AI supercomputer is pumping massive amounts of toxins right into their air.
The immediate real-world fallout was a severe exacerbation of asthma and respiratory illnesses in local children.
And it's not just the air, it's the water, too.
Oh, right, the cooling systems.
These millions of parallel processing chips run incredibly hot. To prevent the hardware from literally melting down, data centers require millions of gallons of fresh water.
The reporting documents situations where these centers are built in regions already suffering from severe droughts. You have local residents forced to compete with a supercomputer for access to fresh drinking water.
It's completely unsustainable.
And I want to clarify for everyone listening, we aren't taking a political stance on environmental policy here. We are simply imparting the facts from the source material regarding the massive industrial infrastructure required to run a single ChatGPT query.
The tech industry markets AI as the tool that will magically solve climate change. Yet the immediate reality of building that tool is an aggressive return to industrial-era pollution and resource hoarding in the poorest zip codes.
At this point, looking at the psychological manipulation, the labor exploitation, the massive environmental degradation, it is very easy to feel entirely overwhelmed.
It can feel very bleak.
The scale of the empire makes it feel like an unstoppable inevitability. But that feeling of helplessness is exactly what the empires rely on. The sources strongly push back against this fatalism, arguing that the specific path of brute force, massive-scale AI development is a choice.
We have options. And Hall introduces a brilliant analogy to clarify this, the transportation analogy.
Okay, let's walk through that.
So transportation encompasses a wide spectrum of vehicles. You have a bicycle, a minivan, a commercial jet, and a Saturn V rocket. They all get you from point A to point B.
Sure.
But if you need to go down the street to the grocery store to buy a gallon of milk, you do not strap yourself into a Saturn V rocket.
Right, that would be absurd.
It would be a disproportionately destructive use of resources for a simple task. Current large language models are the Saturn V rockets of the AI world. To get them to do anything, even draft a simple 3-sentence email, requires massive, disproportionate amounts of computing power, electricity, and water.
Because they're brute forcing the problem by referencing the entire scraped internet every single time.
Exactly. But there is an alternative. There are what the reporting calls the bicycles of AI.
Bicycles of AI, I like that.
These are highly specialized, elegant models designed to do specific tasks incredibly well without devouring the electrical grid.
The prime example in the text is DeepMind's AlphaFold.
Yes, AlphaFold.
AlphaFold is an AI system designed to predict how proteins fold based on amino acid sequences. This is a monumentally complex biological puzzle, and solving it dramatically accelerates drug discovery and our understanding of human disease.
It's life-saving technology.
Critically, AlphaFold won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. It is a world-changing technology. But because it is a bicycle, because it was trained on small, highly curated data sets focused only on amino acids, rather than scraping the entire chaotic internet, it requires minimal compute and minimal energy to run.
It proves that we can harness the profound benefits of artificial intelligence without the catastrophic environmental and labor costs. We don't have to build massive rockets just to go to the store.
We really don't. And understanding that alternatives exist is fueling a massive grassroots pushback against the AI empires. The reporting notes a startling statistic. 80% of Americans currently support regulating the AI industry.
Getting 80% of the public to agree on anything today is almost unprecedented.
It really is. We are seeing lawsuits filed by authors and visual artists fighting back against the unauthorized scraping of their intellectual property.
We're seeing local communities organizing at zoning board meetings, successfully blocking the construction of new data centers, and demanding transparency about power grid usage.
We are also seeing tragic, deeply personal legal challenges forcing a national conversation on algorithmic accountability. The sources highlight the heartbreaking case of the mother of a 14-year-old boy named Sewell Setzer III.
That case is just so sad.
Her son tragically died by suicide after being systematically emotionally manipulated and sexually groomed by a character-based AI chatbot.
Awful.
She is suing the companies involved, shining a harsh light on the devastating human costs when these models are deployed recklessly, without guardrails, simply to extract maximum engagement from vulnerable children.
The empires project an aura of invincibility, but their financial models are actually incredibly fragile. They are burning through tens of billions of dollars. To survive, to hit those massive revenue targets, they rely on an assumption of frictionless, total, unquestioning adoption by the public.
They need you to unquestioningly hand over your data. They need towns to quietly approve zoning permits. They need corporations to blindly integrate their software. So what does this all mean for you? What happens if we decide to be the friction?
If the empires only exist because we feed them our data, our labor, and our electricity, then exercising democratic contestation can break the imperial model.
Refusing to adopt tools built on exploited labor. Opting out of data scraping, demanding bicycles instead of rockets.
The future of this technology is not predetermined by Sam Altman or Elon Musk. It is subject to the democratic will of the public, provided the public decides to engage.
So let's quickly recap the incredible ground we've covered today. We started by dismantling the foundational myth, the fluid definition of intelligence, and the debated hypothesis that scaling a statistical engine will birth a digital brain.
Right. We examined the psychology of the architects, seeing how figures like Sam Altman utilized apocalyptic narratives and mirrored existential fears to secure funding, centralize power, and ward off regulation.
Stepping into the Messiah myth to build an empire.
Exactly. We analyzed the three pillars maintaining this empire: the mass extraction of intellectual property, the monopolization of academic research to silence critical voices like Dr. Timnit Gebru, and the hidden exploitation of labor through data annotation.
We confronted the rapid hollowing out of the economy, where the career ladder is broken, forcing laid-off professionals into precarious, psychologically damaging gig work to train the machines that replace them.
We grounded the ethereal cloud in its physical reality, looking at colossal data centers pumping methane into marginalized communities like Memphis and competing for local water supplies.
And finally, we explored the path forward, recognizing that the brute force, massive-scale approach is a choice, and that the public has the power to demand highly efficient, specialized AI tools instead.
It is a staggering amount of information, but it is essential for navigating the reality of the next decade.
Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something from that Klarna CEO memo we talked about because it sparks a fascinating, somewhat unsettling thought for you to mull over.
Oh, about human connection.
Yes. He mentioned that as AI drives the cost of generating software and customer service down to zero, authentic human connection will suddenly become a premium.
It raises a profound question about the social fabric of the future. If the economy continues to hollow out the middle class, leaving only the elite tech orchestrators at the very top, and the desperate data labelers at the very bottom, what happens to human interaction?
Will authentic human interaction become the ultimate luxury good?
It's a very real possibility.
We might be hurtling toward a bifurcated society where only the ultra-wealthy can afford the privilege of speaking to a real human being. The wealthy get a human customer service rep when their flight is canceled, a human doctor for their diagnosis, a human artist to entertain them.
Meanwhile, the vast majority of society might be relegated to interacting solely with cold statistical machines.
Machines that were ironically trained by the very laid-off peers who used to hold those human jobs.
It is a chilling and entirely plausible trajectory if we remain passively on this current path.
It brings us right back to where we started. The next time you see a pristine product launch with an executive standing on a glowing stage promising a frictionless, magical future in the cloud,
remember the heavy, noisy, deeply human machinery operating just out of frame.
the invisible factories, the gig workers, the methane turbines, the legal intimidation. The future isn't magic, it is an industrial structure, and you have a say in how it gets built. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the tools you use, and keep looking closely at the physical world they depend on.